Five,
like,
4,
do the action.
3, 2, 1. Hi guys. Like Abby said, my name is Lindsay Crable-Burton. I guess it's Thursday, so I guess she claims me as her mom. I currently cover public education for the Coastal World. And before that, I was a full-time freelancer for 10 years, which means I wrote for a lot of different outlets, depending on what was going on and who had the money to pay for me to go cover a little bit of everything. So sometimes that meant covering high school football in the WNBA. That sometimes meant sitting through really long, boring meetings. Sometimes it meant sitting through court hearings, and once upon a time, it actually meant hanging out at the teacher walkout that you guys might remember about, what was that, 2018? 2018. Yeah. Yeah, I was saying you were there as a teacher, so. So.
Shut up.
When you're a reporter, you get to deal with a little bit of everything. You have a front row seat to history, for better or worse. So, Beth, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself a little bit better, if that's all right.
Yeah, so my name is Beth Wallace. I'm an education reporter. So I work for radio news. And so if you've ever turned on the public radio station, KWDS, you might hear my voice on the radio. So I work for this, it's called a collaborative. It means like all the public radio stations in the state, I work for all of them. It's called State Impact Oklahoma. We cover education, health, and science and environment. So I'm obviously the education reporter, which makes sense because I was a teacher for 5 years. I was a band director, and then I went back to school for journalism, and I've been in this job for a couple of years now. So that's about it for me.
For me, part of the reason I got into this was, it's something different every day. You get to be that kid, that girl, and ask a lot of awkward questions. Sometimes you don't necessarily like the answers you get, but you still get to ask. You get to call out elected leaders on their shenanigans, which is nice from time to time. So,
and you get access to them.
Yeah, and you get access to them. I mean, part of being a journalist is holding truth to power. So that means having to go, reach out to those elected officials and ask them why they did what they did, or why they didn't do something. Beth and I have had to ask the state superintendent awkward questions. We've had to ask multiple elected officials awkward questions because it comes with the job. It's either we ask, or they have to stand there and have a whole long line of you guys ask those questions and have to give the same answer over and over and over. And that gets old for you guys, and it gets old for them. So.
Yeah, so we consider media to be gatekeepers. Does anyone know what that means to be a gatekeeper?
No.
What does that mean? They don't. Yeah, you're exactly right. So a gatekeeper, basically like if you're the guy on a farm, you're keeping all the goats inside and then you let a few goats out at a time. You're the gatekeeper. You're the person who lets a little bit of information go at a time. It's a lot of responsibility. Like, imagine if you were like looking at everything going on in Oklahoma and only you decided what everybody else knew about. It's a huge responsibility to decide what's important enough to be part of your news. Hey boys, I was a teacher before, so that's probably not gonna. Yeah.
Timothy.
So having that kind of responsibility is really, really kind of crazy because ultimately, if we don't report on it, if other education reporters don't report on it, you guys don't ever know about it, and that's a ton of responsibility. Like your parents don't know who to vote for, in elections.
Or if there is even an election.
Or if there is even an election
in some cases.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting part of what we call the fourth estate, the press, right? Is that we are gatekeepers and...
One part is also just having to double check before something goes into print. I mean, if you read a bunch of lies, are you gonna, are you gonna believe them? Part of what we have to do is having to sort out, okay, what's real and what's not, before we even put it into print. And some days that's a lot easier than others.
So you guys were reading about Nellie Bly, correct?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so what are some of your impressions of her? Like, whenever you read about her, what were some of the words you used to describe her? Just yell out. Bold. Bold, absolutely. One more thing? Spy?
Yeah.
Spy. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Courageous.
Courageous, absolutely. A leader, yeah. Now, it gets into kind of a sticky situation here because media has changed over the course of history, right? And if I tried to be an undercover reporter right now, how well do you think that would go? People know my name, people know my voice. You can look me up on Facebook, you can look me up on Twitter, you can look me up on Instagram. it would be very, very difficult for any journalist to go undercover right now because of how much access people have to them all the time. So there's one kind of functional issue why we don't really do undercover anymore. I think probably the biggest one is though ethics, right? I've never been undercover.
Closest I've come to going undercover is hiding in a closet at the instruction of an elder. So, not quite the same.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I've never been undercover. It's just not really something we do anymore because the press has changed, right? Instead of kind of being this place where we can sort of discuss ideas, that conversation happens more outside of the press. And the press is really for delivering that information to you so that you could have those conversations, right? And so what we do is we try to be really upfront with whomever we're talking to. Like, hey, this is who I am, this is what the story is, this is when it's gonna come out, do you have a comment, right? And that way we don't have, I really, really hate the idea of like a source of mine waking up in the morning to a story that they had no idea like what that story was actually about, right? That's not a good feeling for me. I'm very, very upfront with all of my sources. For me, that's an ethical issue. Like I feel morally correct whenever I'm upfront with my sources.
Well, that, and when you have moments like that, think about it. If somebody put something out there about you without talking to you, would you want to talk to them again? Would you want their perspective? Would you be, same core concept for us? Because particularly for the two of us, since we both cover, since we deal with education, since we cover what's known as a beat, we have to talk to a lot of the same people over and over and over for different stories. And when you burn somebody, they're a lot less likely to take your phone call or to respond to your email or even acknowledge you in public.
Which has happened.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it's happened to me too.
And sometimes you can't avoid it. Sometimes you're gonna put out a story that doesn't paint someone in a good light because they did a bad thing,
yeah.
Right? And then they might not want to talk to you after that. And that's just kind of an occupational hazard. It's just gonna happen.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I've had that happen too. Why did you print that thing? Why that story about me that wasn't nice? Well, you're the one who screwed up. Here's the receipts showing you screwed up. It's not my fault you didn't return my calls. So. Also understand that AI came up and plagiarism in some of the online discussions. I'm not naming names, dude. Plagiarism is a quick way to get fired in this business.
Oh, it
is the easiest way to get fired, or one of the easiest ways to get fired. We both have to cite our sources, whether that's an interview, talking to a person, or documents, court documents, meeting minutes, whatever. We have to be able to show that we're not just making stuff up. We're not ripping off somebody else's work. And even, I mentioned sources. It's even a big ethical discussion on whether to name, whether or not, if somebody asks not to be named, that's usually a huge discussion. I can only speak for my newsroom, but it's very rare do we allow a source to remain anonymous. And usually if it's done, if we allow it, it's either because they could be in physical danger, somebody who's a victim of, somebody who's fleeing an abuser, somebody who could lose their job or be deported. We've had all three of those come up within the last couple of years. But generally speaking, it's okay. You want this information. You're providing this information. I need to be able to attribute it to you, so that if you're wrong, I can go back, I have the receipts to say, well, hold up, according to so-and-so, this isn't just me making up something whole cloth.
Right, and if you're reading an article that has a whole bunch of anonymous sources, it's just a lot harder to trust, right? Because you're just like, well, I don't really know who's actually saying this thing. I don't really know who to hold to account, who to email about this thing or anything like that. So AI, that's something that we're gonna have to be dealing with in our jobs pretty soon. The newspaper industry has a much harder path ahead of it than the radio industry. Thankfully, we are a nonprofit, and it's working out well. But newspaper industry, they rely on ads and subscriptions, right? And so whenever we've had AI come in, and you guys know ChatGPT, right? They can write whole essays. Well, they can write whole articles too. Are they good articles? No. Did they actually go talk to people who were involved in the story? Of course not. They can't. They're robots, right? Did they actually go, in my case, did they go get some sound? Did they go to a classroom and hear people talk? I used to be a science and environment reporter. I went 2 miles underground to a nuclear waste facility. Did they do that? No, they're a robot in a computer, right? So we're really, really worried. If a robot ends up being the gatekeeper, what's that news gonna look like eventually? Not not very informative, right? Yeah. So AI, it's scary for us.
Skosh, yeah.
Yeah, and it could,
Terminator flashbacks.
right, it could be replacing us. Probably not in my medium again because it's an audio medium and it's a little bit harder to replicate, but like.
Yeah, I got a baseball bat handy for the bots, so you know.
Yeah, for sure. Cool.
Questions so far? Relevant questions, let me preface that.
That's good.
We don't bite. I don't know what I told you, but we don't bite.
Yes, ma'am.
So do you guys have a choice in AI like incorporated with your job?
Like I said, it hasn't come for me yet because I have radio and it's a lot harder for AI to be involved in that. But like there are definitely newsrooms across the country that are being taken over by AI because you don't have to pay a robot, right? It's much cheaper. Yeah.
I will say, to clarify my no, I personally do not. I have editors that they, in theory, would be able to make that decision, and so far that has not been a discussion in the Tulsa World newsroom. I am praying to the assorted panoply that continues to be the case, but I'm not the boss, so I don't get to make the final say.
Are there any things you see as like benefits to working with AI? Like I know you're kind of like afraid of it, but is there anything that?
You know, this might be kind of silly, but spreadsheet AI is very handy for us. So like if we're trying to gather a lot of data for like a really data heavy story where there's just a lot of numbers, we can put that through AI programs and it processes that data a little bit easier. We don't have to do those sorts of things. That's probably all I use AI for.
That spell check.
Yeah, right, yeah, like just the really basic like Excel spreadsheets and spell check and that sort of thing, yeah. Let's talk about how important media is. Yeah, so something I wanted to talk to you guys about, how many of you are familiar, I feel like you're in Tulsa, probably most of you are familiar with the Tulsa Race Massacre. How many of you knew that a newspaper was one of the main instigators of the Tulsa Race Massacre?
Even better.
What was the newspaper called?
Mm. Was it the Tulsa World or?
Not quite. Tulsa World came a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah. That's all right. Yeah. It's the Tulsa Tribune, right?
Oh.
There were two main newspapers at the time. There was the Tulsa Star, which was a newspaper for the Greenwood community. There was the Tulsa Tribune, which was literally the exact opposite. And that newspaper is the one that, with the headline, told people to go to that jail, get out Dick Rowland, and lynch him. A newspaper did that. They did it twice. They did it with 2 editorials that day. The headlines are horrible. I won't repeat them.
Yeah.
But that much power exists in the press. It can start a massacre. It's a lot of power, guys, right? You can be very, very responsible with that kind of power. And if you're publishing things that you know are going to incite people to violence, we get something like what happened in 1921. So I know it's a very, very serious moment, and I don't want to like bring us down a whole lot, but I do want to kind of impart on you just kind of what a big deal media is, how much it affects your day-to-day life, how much it has changed the course of history, especially in Tulsa. So, any questions? It was a bit of a down note.
Yeah, that's okay.
But
I mean,
it's a serious, like we do a very serious job.
Oh yeah, and considering where we are, we have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, we do a very serious job. There are stories that I do that, and I think this is a good thing to talk about, really hurt me as a person. Do you guys remember last summer when there was a shooting at the hospital in Tulsa? Yeah, they're shooting at St. Francis Hospital. Yeah, so NPR, which is, I kind of work for, sort of tangentially, NPR called me and they said, you better get down there, we need some tape. And so we're not going to talk about how fast I drove, but I drove very quickly down to St. Francis. I got out, the mayor is talking, there's police everywhere. I'm like flashing my press badge, I'm getting my equipment out. And like the whole time, I'm not really processing the fact that people have died in this building next to me because I'm so focused on job, right? Job. They need tape, they need reporting, they need accuracy. And then after all that night was over, which ended very, very late for me, I ended up having to do a morning interview that started at 3:30 in the morning for me. So I had a whole night of reporting. The next day, just like sitting with it was really tough. Like you're gonna be in situations that are, if you're a journalist, that kind of hurt your heart, right? You're gonna be in situations that, gosh, nobody should be in. And you don't want anybody to be in.
Yeah, I mean, being part of this job, I mentioned that reporters, we're the ones that ask the awkward questions so that you guys don't have to. That also sometimes means having to watch things so that you guys don't have to. Addie has seen me on nights where I've come home from assignments that are brutal. Unfortunately, it comes with the job. And you find ways, granted, every job has its painful moments. It's just a different definition of pain. Sometimes for us, it's having to watch things that some folks wouldn't like. My dad is also a reporter. He's had to watch executions.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of reporters do, is there has to be witnesses for executions in our state.
Yeah. My dad also covered the Murrah bombing, because it was a situation like with what Beth had with, getting called because you're the closest person. He happened to be the closest person to the Murrah bombing for the Tulsa World that day, or one of the closest. There are things that he saw that day that to this day he will not talk about. You got a question?
What's the Murrah bombing?
Oklahoma City bombing?
April 19th, 1995? Yeah. The Alfred P. Murrah, yeah, that's what it was. So, I mean, are there some really cool parts of this? Yeah, I mean, as we said, we get to meet folks that we wouldn't get to meet otherwise. So, I got to meet Candace Parker a long time ago, when the Tulsa Shock was still here. The WNBA team that's now known as the Dallas Wings, yeah, I see the befuddled looks, yeah. Got to meet her when they played in Tulsa. I know most of you guys probably have no clue who he is, but I got to meet Yevgeny Yevtushenko, the poet. So, I mean, yeah, for all those really cool moments, there are also some really not cool
Let me tell you about some cool moments, just so we can get back to what's fun about
stuff.
this
Yeah.
job, because a lot of this job is really, really fun.
How do you guys deal with the trauma? What's your go-to after you've gone through the trauma? What's your rehabilitation?
For me, music is number one. Like I said, I was a band director, so I have 2 degrees in music. Music is something that's really important to me. So I usually just like to sing as loud as I possibly can and make my dogs really, really upset. And also too, I live in the country, and just being able to kind of sit, it's really kind of 2 things, expressing anguish through singing and that sort of thing, but then also just getting to sit in the quiet is really, I really, really like quiet too, which is why I wasn't a teacher for very long, just kidding, but, so what about you?
Loud metal, classic metal, the Black Sabbath, some Pantera, but just loud and a lot of bass. And either I race walk, so either long extended sessions with my Brooks, or the weight room. I have a 25-pound kettlebell that I'm very good friends with. So, yeah, Olivia.
I had a question for Ms. Beth. You said you had 2 degrees in music, and then you also said, I think it was after you were teaching, you went back to school for journalism. What education did you do to get into the business? What
education did I do? What was the very end of that?
To get into
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so like I said, I had a bachelor's degree in music education. I have a master's degree in conducting performance, which means that I can wave around a stick very, very well. So you've seen a conductor, right? Yes, okay, great. So after 5 years, the teacher walkout happened, and it was very disruptive. But for me, it really kind of showed me the role of press in disseminating information and just how incredibly critical it is that they get it right. One of the big issues, one of the big narratives whenever we were doing that walkout is that these greedy teachers, they just want more raises. We'd actually gotten our raises before the walkout even started. And we were walking out for classroom funding for you guys. My music room, the ceiling was falling in from mold. You couldn't leave paper in the room because it would just soak. It wouldn't be dry anymore. 1 second, okay? So I really felt very, very strongly that the message that we are really working for your kids, there's an asbestos disclaimer next door to my room. There are a lot of problems. I mean, it didn't seem like the public was really understanding it, and I got so frustrated. And then I really started understanding how the role of media works, how important it is that people understand, and get a whole picture, a comprehensive picture of what's going on. And so I stayed at school 1 more year. Because like I said, I got 2 degrees, so I needed to be very, very sure that I was going to leave this career and it was going to be the right thing for me. And I went to OU, nice sweatshirt. I went to OU, and because I had those degrees already and I had a whole bunch of college credits from that, I only stayed at OU for 5 semesters, so 2.5 years. Usually it would take like about 4 years, like a normal degree, to get that. But I also got a political science minor too, so it probably couldn't even taken maybe less, like 4 semesters. But yeah, so it really didn't take a whole lot of time for me to transition over. And honestly, the job that I have now, I was interning at the radio station at OU, and that opened up my pathway to get this job that I have now. So it really was the education that kind of got me to this job.
So one of my 2 undergraduate degrees is in journalism. I grew up around reporters. So when I got to college, I was like, yep, no, this is what I want to do. And then as I was finishing up, I have a bachelor's degree in journalism and a bachelor's degree in political science. And I was finishing up, I'm like, okay, I don't want to be a grown-up yet. I'm going to figure out, make sure that I'm not doing this because it's the only thing I know. So I stuck around for 2 more years and got a master's degree through what is then known as the School of International Studies at Oklahoma State University. I hung out with Peace Corps volunteers for 2 years, basically. So, although that degree has paid off again. So.
Good question though. Any more questions?
Oh no, we had a question.
Oh, yes.
I was just gonna ask you what school you go to.
It's very, very small. Do you guys know where Old Mulgee is by any chance? It's 7 miles east of Old Mulgee. It's called Morris.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
I think I've heard
one
of
of
that.
3 now activities. Any other questions? Yes.
When you guys were kids like our age, did you want to be a journalist, or did you just kind of discover you wanted to when you got older?
That is a really, really good question. So back whenever I was in 8th grade, we took an aptitude test. You know what an aptitude test is? Right, it basically tells you like what careers you might be suited for. I don't really know if they do that anymore, but it was something that we did at 8th grade when I was 16. And so the very top job was journalism for me on that aptitude test. So I didn't know it back then. I had, I think, outside signals telling me that that was probably a good way to go. But honestly, I'm very happy that I taught first and then I do this because I think being a teacher really informs how I approach journalism. Because like journalists, all we do is really teach the people, right? We teach you guys what we know about this certain amount of information. And so it was kind of a roundabout way, but for me, it happened much later in life. I was like 25. How about you?
So, like I said, I grew up around journalists, so I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. My dad covered sports until 1993, so I hung out around sports writers. And I was like, nope, I want to do this. I want to get paid to go to all the football games. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's no cheering in the press box. This is a problem. So, took the little detour while going on the news side. But to answer your question, yeah, I had some idea back then, but a lot of my colleagues can't necessarily say the same thing, and that's totally fine.
And I will say, this is a job that people do. You guys know what the term burnout means? Yeah. It can be a tough job, and like I really appreciate you asking about like what do you do to kind of like step away from it, because it's really, really important in a job like this that is kind of a high stress job that you do set boundaries. Like I have a little bit more of a luxury to do this than you do because like I have a broadcast window, so like if something happens at 8 o'clock at night, I don't have to get on it right then because we don't broadcast until the next morning. On the other hand, right, like she has to get on stuff super, super fast. But for me, as much as I can, I close my laptop at like 5:30. And like that's not something that happens a lot in a lot of journalism. And I think we're starting to get to a conversation where so many journalists are just dropping like flies because they're just running themselves into the ground. But it's becoming a lot more accepted for journalists to say, hey, these are the hours that I'm going to work because I am doing this long term. And I'm thinking about this long term. And if I burn out right now, then you're not going to get the great news from me that I want to get you, right? More questions?
I have a question. Can you show us your props?
Absolutely. So yeah, I brought some of my recording equipment. Yes, this is called, 2 things is called a shotgun mic. And the reason why is because, right. Well, the other name for it is a dead cat, and I'm not kidding, so it's a dead cat. So I do have a brush for it. So a shotgun mic, it's unidirectional, which means that this, wherever I point it at, that's what's going to get the sound. So it's not going to get sound from here, it's going to get sound from here. I record it on my recorder. I listen to it through my headphones, and then I put it into a computer program, and I try as much as I can to make it as artistic as possible. I was a musician, and it is really fun to be able to like go get, for instance, when I was a science and environment reporter, I got to go to the release of some otters that had been rehabilitated whenever they were babies. And so I was one of 2 reporters that were invited to go to this release. And like getting to like be down there with the otters and like, you know, getting this close to them and like getting their little, like they feed them fish and they just like snack, 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 snack. You know, those little sounds I got to capture and then put in my story to kind of transport the listener there, right? And so you can do kind of pretty artistic things with an audio medium. Sorry, but hey, you can only do with a print medium quite much. But
No, it's all
yeah,
good.
but print medium also relies a lot more on photography.
Yeah,
Yeah, and do you take photos?
only if I have to.
Okay.
I was hired as a writer, I'm not a photographer. This is my Swiss Army knife, so.
Yeah.
I'm able to record my interviews, in a pinch, photos for breaking news, but my props are nowhere near as cool.
Yeah, we do have a lot of props. I've also got different, you know, microphones. So let's say that, so the reason why this is so fuzzy is because the wind guard is mainly for being outside, but it's also just a really good long range mic. So if I'm like in a big room, then I can kind of get back here and still get the sound. But like, let's say I'm at a press conference. Yeah, I'm gonna be right here with my mic, right? Yeah. Let's say I am interviewing someone. Like you. Oh, there goes my mic. Oh no, there we go. Yeah, usually I'm a little more organized in these interviews. But if I was interviewing somebody like you, I would put this right in front of you. I would have him do a sound check. What I do for sound checks is, hey, what'd you have for breakfast this morning?
I had a breakfast burrito.
Okay.
And I had mini hash browns and orange juice.
Okay. Well, I should have turned it on before I did that. But so what I would do is listen to that and say, okay, well, that's maybe not quite loud enough. I'm gonna turn this up a little bit louder. What did you have for dinner last night?
I had spaghetti.
Spaghetti.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you the kind of like the meat spaghetti or just like?
Well, I'm not the meatball type. I'm the meat in the sauce type.
Exactly.
It's really important.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. And what's your favorite subject?
Band.
Band. What instrument do you play?
I play trombone.
Cool. So like I would have like little short conversations. First off, to just like warm someone up, because if I'm about to ask them really serious questions, like it's just nicer to like kind of start off with not like, hey, why'd you do this horrible thing, right? So yeah. But also too, it helps me with my sound. If he ends up being way too loud, like I'm being way too loud right now, and you can see on my equipment, it's peaking, right? You see how this goes orange and red? Hello, 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 hello. That's because it's way too loud, right? And so whenever I put my file into my computer, it's just gonna be like, it's not gonna be nice, pretty sound. So I have to be really, really conscious whenever I go get sound, that I'm like constantly monitoring. You know, if there was, for instance, whenever I went like 2 miles underground to a nuclear waste facility, there were a ton of airlocks, and they're really, really loud. And they make for really cool scenes whenever I put the story together, but I had to be so, so, so careful to get it at just the right volume so you could hear all of it, but it wouldn't just blow the speaker up, right? Have you ever like blown a speaker because you played it too loud? Yeah, and it gets that like rattly sound. It's not nice, yeah. So, any questions about like equipment? Yes?
I have a question about like the burnt out that you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
It was when you like are feeling like, have you ever felt like that you're getting burned out, and then what boundaries did you have to put up?
Yeah, I know it. So, yes, I've definitely felt burnout from time to time, because, you know, we're human.
Right.
So as far as the boundaries that I personally set up, I actually made a point to take vacation days, which sometimes gets discouraged, particularly in newsrooms where there aren't a whole lot of folks, to try to cover a whole lot of things going on. But I'm lucky that I have editors who understand, oh wait, you're what? Yeah, no, get out of here. I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to see you for a few days until you get it together. I know not all of my colleagues at other outlets can necessarily say that, so that's part of it. I'm very lucky to have editors that acknowledge that burnout, because they felt it too, because again, they're human. Everybody's boundaries look a little different. For some folks, it's, you know, as long as they just have that thrash metal for 20 minutes, I'm good, or they're good. It varies from person to person.
You know, for me, your teacher might have an opinion on this as well. Teaching was much harder for me. I thought I was way more stressed out when I taught. and I loved it. Like I really, really did love it. So I think my bar for burnout is really high because I taught for a while, right? Honestly, I just really love this job. Like we do talk about burnout, and there are really hard parts, but like that's like maybe 10 to 15% of the job is hard. The rest of it is like really exciting. Like whenever you get a scoop, like whenever I figured out the Ryan Walter stuff the other day, right? We figured out that our superintendent of public instruction lied to Congress about your school district.
About Booker T.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I figured it out, and I was like, wow, okay, my heart starts going, my blood starts pumping, I start calling people, I start getting statements, I put something together, and I make his office very, very angry at me. But, that's kind of like the joy, like the really exciting part of like getting a story together.
The adrenaline rush.
The adrenaline, it's absolutely an adrenaline. If you're an adrenaline junkie, like journalism is for you, for sure. But honestly, I love this job. Like, I get to do so much. I have a really good work-life balance too, which again, things are different between print and audio. Like whenever something's more publicly funded, like a nonprofit, like what I work for, we have a lot more job security, and so we can, I have like 8-hour work days, and I can, put those boundaries up and not like really burn myself out. If I was working for a newspaper, however, I feel like I might have a little harder time doing that. So it really does depend on kind of which medium you go. Like TV news is also a completely different issue.
Yeah.
TV news, they're going everywhere. Like if there's a car accident, they're there, right? That's not something I do because I cover statewide education. I don't have to go like do the smaller, not the smaller, but like
The breaking
nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Are there certain things that like you focus on? Like, is there one specific thing that you focus on, or is it like you just have a broad things that you report on? Like
Yeah. So, are you specifically an education reporter?
Yeah, well, my primary beat is public education, so and then by that, I primarily deal with Tulsa Public Schools, all the charter partners, and all the suburbs. However, given that, and on top of that, given that the Tulsa World's newsroom is a little smaller, everybody picks up things as needed. I primarily also help out with tribal coverage of the state's tribes, since I primarily covered Indigenous affairs for 10 years when I was a freelancer. I still have a lot of contacts there, and I put that to use. But no, my primary, to answer your question, my primary is public education. The other stuff is as needed.
Yeah, and the thing we call that is a beat. So like if you, so her beat, public education, my beat, overall education. So like anything like pre-K through 12, higher ed, like college, private education, any of that kind of falls under my beat. Yeah. And so Lindsay really focuses in on the Tulsa area. I'm a statewide reporter, so I usually do a lot more like government-related education stuff. So, yeah.
Olivia, what you got?
It's kind of piggybacking off of that. If you guys have your specific beats that you do, would you say that your stuff is like kind of like stylized? Is it like not necessarily stylized, but would you say it's like kind of specific to you, how you write, how you?
Are you saying like do we have our own touch?
Yeah,
right.
kind of. And like, how would you?
Yeah, I mean most writers, whether they have a beat or not, have their own little touches. Now there are certain things that because we have beats, there are certain things that tend to come up more often, whether that's specific terms, phrases, things like that, or specific
Accreditation.
Yeah, accreditation.
By the way, it's accreditation, and Lord knows I got a lot of calls on that. It's not accreditation. So yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of personalization, but kind of the goal is that you don't really personalize, right? Is that it's pretty like straightforward.
Yeah, you want to be as neutral as possible. Because you don't, you want to make sure that you're presenting as full a picture as possible without taking sides. Now, having said that, I mean, yeah, I do have a habit of sneaking in references to The Simpsons and to tribes in my weekly education notebook that runs on Mondays. I've put Hail to the Bus Driver in there more than once. But I gotta write it every week. I might as well at least get a chuckle while I'm writing. So.
Yes.
Okay, what about like that whole? I'm really curious about the whole movie.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I was a science and environment reporter for a year before I switched over to education. Basically, there's a lot of different ways that we get power, right? There's hydropower, there's nuclear power, and the problem with nuclear power, I mean, there's problems with all kinds of power, but one of the issues is that we don't have anywhere to store the waste. Like, we really don't have anywhere in the whole country to store the waste, and it's becoming a really huge problem. And so I went to Carlsbad, New Mexico, and they have a nuclear waste storage facility that's 2 miles underground. And so I got to go down the big elevator shaft and like through all of the airlocks. I should have brought it, and I regret that I didn't. But I was given a little chunk of salt that had 200 million year old water inside of it. That I just took home because it's a nice little souvenir. So you get to do these really kind of cool things like, you know, the auto release and going underground, and Lord knows I have walked around a ton of fields looking for prairie chickens. So you get to do some pretty cool stuff in the field, and stuff that, like, I mean, you know, being a teacher is awesome, but I don't get to travel, right, whenever I was a teacher. And so, like, there's a lot of travel involved, there's a lot of new experiences involved. And like, even though I'm an Oklahoma reporter, I got to go outside of it to New Mexico, and that was kind of cool too. So just, I don't know if that answers your question totally about what the story was about or anything. Yeah. But thankfully it was the lowest level grade of radiation, so I wasn't really in danger or anything. But yeah, it was a fun story to be able to do, for sure. Any other questions? Yes.
How hard is it, like, not to let your political values get in the way of, like, your reporting?
That's a fantastic
And
question.
like fueling your questions. Like, how can you not be like, oh, you're somebody that I probably shouldn't like because you have a different political value than me. How about this, and this? Like,
That's a great
That's a
question.
good question. Yeah, absolutely. By the way, too, if a journalist is ever told, like, great question, like, part of us is just like, oh. Like, that's what we do is we ask questions.
Yeah.
You want to take this one?
So, how many of you guys have been in drama? Currently or previously, or have had acting experience? Part of being a reporter is having a poker face and not letting anybody know how you feel politically on a specific topic. So I mean, and it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice to be able to divorce yourself, to leave your personal opinions at the door and focus on, okay, what are my readers going to want to know, or my listeners? What is my editor going to ask me when I come back with the story and they're going through, well, where's this information? So it takes a lot of practice in order to have that poker face. It's hard. I'm not going to lie. It is very hard.
You guys are 8th graders, right?
Yes.
I think you're old enough to kind of have a nuanced conversation about this. We talk a lot about the idea of objectivity. What does that word mean? Yeah, I don't know either, because it's a really hard thing to define, objectivity. What it means is, like, you don't have a bias. Like, that's kind of the base meaning of it, is that, you know, whatever information is, if it's objective, that means, like, without any opinion, that is the truth, right? Everyone has their own version of objectivity, so it ends up not being objective. And so I think that while the goal absolutely is to reach objectivity whenever you're a journalist, like, we can have a realistic conversation about the things that you are focusing on because those are the things you care about. For instance, I focus a lot on teacher labor issues. Why do you think that is? Right, yeah, exactly, right? So, I mean, there are ways that, like, you know, our own kind of personality gets into the news. The goal, though, is that our opinions do not, right?
Well, and this also goes back to Olivia's question of whether we have writing styles. I mean, it even shows up sometimes in who you ask for sources.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
Because, like, for some, you know, a lot of my stories, a lot of the sources are Native folks, because that's my community. They're voices and that's who I'm like, okay, yep, I know that you'll take my call. You'll answer my questions. Whether I like your answer is another thing entirely, but you'll at least take my call. So that does show up somewhat as well. It's just in who you call for sources or where you look for sources, where you look for documents and data.
Absolutely, yeah. And, like, there's definitely a big issue with journalists who will just, like, write about communities that they never put themselves inside.
Yeah, parachute journalism.
Yeah, we call it parachute journalism, whenever they, like, parachute into a story and they, like, I don't know, they're there for a day or two and they think they understand the whole nuance of a community, and then they write about it and they parachute right out of there. They probably don't, though, right? Like, it really does take people who live in their community to understand it.
So yeah, spoiler alert, you guys have all heard about Killers of the Flower Moon coming out.
Yes.
You're probably going to see or hear about a lot of parachute journalism in Osage County. Folks coming up just discovering that, oh my gosh, the Osages are still there. Oh my gosh, they still have head rights. So, I mean, when you see all those stories come out, print, radio, whatever, specifically about Killers of the Flower Moon, stop and think, okay, is this person local? Are they actually from Oklahoma, or is this some rando who couldn't find Osage County on a map a week ago?
Yeah, so I think a lot about the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial. We
That's
had a
your
lot
watch.
of national reporters just parachute in and say, wow, Stacey Abrams is gonna be here. Wow, there's gonna be a whole bunch of celebrities here. There's gonna be a big, event that happens downtown. Wow. And like that was the national news take of it. But if y'all remember what happened, it did not turn out that way. And for a very specific reason. Because we had survivors of the race massacre who were still in litigation. They were still in a lawsuit with the city because the city has not paid reparations yet. And so those survivors and their lawyers said, wait a second, we are not gonna be a part of that. And they weren't a part of that. And that was not something that was in the national conversation because those national journalists had no idea what they were walking into. They didn't know about like 100 years worth of this back and forth between these communities, right? And so whenever you're a national journalist, it's really hard to get a good story because you're just gonna pop in, hope you understand everything, and pop right back out. That's why I'm a big proponent of community journalism.
Like, and you guys, you know how you have to study for tests? We have to study too. We have, when we go into an assignment, whether it's a school board meeting or prepping for an interview, we have to prep so that we ask the right questions. So we ask smart questions. So we don't come in sounding like national journalists who don't know what the heck they're walking into.
Exactly.
So homework doesn't stop when you graduate. You had a question, sorry.
Okay, so like about questions.
Yeah.
Like since you say like your editors and everyone knows certain things. So how do you guys get the questions that you ask the people? Do you think of them, or like do people or do like the people or whatever? Like,
Yeah. So I write out my questions beforehand and I keep them in this little notebook. And so whenever I am interviewing somebody, I have my questions here. And then while they're talking, I don't have a very good short-term memory. And so say you're talking to me, you're saying an answer, I think of something that I want to ask you, I just write down a little keyword of it, and then I keep going back to you, right? Because otherwise I'm constantly trying to remember what to ask her next, and I'm not actually listening to her. So writing down stuff is a huge thing. I don't know if you do it, but
Occasionally, depends.
yeah.
I mean, when it's a 5-hour school board meeting, yeah, I might take notes just to make sure to remember after the press scrum. I usually, most of my questions, I think of it myself. Occasionally, I'll have an editor say, hey, by the way, if you get the chance, ask X, Y, or Z. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
Can you pass this around? But yeah, so it's always when you take a test, you have to be prepared, you have to study for it, you gotta study, and that usually means getting your questions together.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So in the newsroom, are editors typically the boss?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question, just kind of the hierarchy. It's a little bit different for either of ours.
Yeah.
But at radio stations, you've got basically the station manager whose job it is for everything, getting money for the station, finding donations, doing the news, all that stuff. They're kind of on top. Then you've got a managing editor, and that's who you're talking about. They're the person who goes through all your stuff and says, hey, did you think about this thing? I don't want to publish this yet because this thing isn't ready. They're the person who kind of does all of that, quality control. And then there's reporters. Some newsrooms have senior reporters and junior reporters. We don't. We just have reporters. Print's a little bit different though.
Yeah, we're a little different. So we have an editor-in-chief. The exact title sometimes changes, but big boss, editor-in-chief. They are the final say when it comes to matters like hiring. If somebody, whether to file litigation to get records or things like that, and yeah, we have had to have those conversations. They're delightful. And then city editor, and that's the person he's directly over the section editors. We have a sports editor, features editor, photo editor, news editor, and then have reporters, and then equal level photographers, and our copy desk. Copy desk are the folks that read through stories and cut lines to make sure.
The cut line is a photo caption.
Thank you. Yeah. Make sure. Okay. Did they spell names right? Is there mathing? If there are numbers in the story, does it make logical sense? Things like that. And for the record, no, we don't have anything to do with the advertising side. Yeah. What you got, Mr. Vickers?
Oh, I was gonna ask about her book.
Yeah.
How many questions do you think per person you usually have?
It totally depends on how much time they give me. Yeah, because for instance, I interviewed the state superintendent a couple weeks ago. He gave me 15 minutes. I asked 8 questions.
Cause I saw the times in there and I was wondering.
Oh yeah. And a lot of times too, I will write down if I'm in a board meeting, like I'll check my timestamp from my recorder if there's like an important thing that's said. That way I don't have to like go through my transcript later and try to find it. So yeah. Yeah. Anything else? What time is the class?
Well, so this is a double block day, so we're not out of here for a while. But I do have one final question that could you give them some tips and tricks on how to know whether what they are reading or listening to is not, you're not credible. Yeah, so maybe just some things, because I did sign up for all of my students to get the Partners in Education to get the Tulsa World, and I've been a lifelong fan of KWGS, and anytime I want to talk about NPR, I would love to. But how, what denotes if it's trustworthy or not, I guess.
So, do you guys know what hyperbole is?
Yes.
What
Make
is it?
believe
What's
thing.
hyperbole? Olivia, what you got?
It's a big exaggeration of something, so
Yep.
splitting it to a non-literal sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's speaking in extremes. You know, it's always terrible.
That's the coolest shirt I've ever seen.
Exactly.
Right.
So when you're listening to something or reading something, stop and think. You know, stop and look at. Okay, are they using hyperbolic language to describe a person, place, thing, the subject of the story?
Does it read like a book instead of a news story?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, if it's nothing but superlatives nonstop.
What's a superlative?
Do you guys know what a superlative is? Sorry, I should have asked. Best this, worst that.
It's like the most of something,
Yeah.
right? The coolest, the coldest, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything of the S.
S.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're seeing that, seeing or hearing that nonstop, chances are the media you are consuming is not particularly credible.
Sourcing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you're only seeing that like there's only like one kind of source here, like say it's only officials, but like this policy affects a lot of people. Like why weren't people actually talked to? Or it could be the other way around. Maybe it only talks to the people, but it didn't get the official to say like, well, here's how this thing works actually kind of on paper, right? So you have to make sure you're looking at who that journalist is talking to and make sure that they're talking to different kinds of people for that article. I hyperlink a lot. Do you guys know what hyperlink means?
No.
Yeah, so basically whenever you hyperlink something, yeah, it's because like, so what I do stories for the radio, I write an article for it online, and I do photography. So I kind of do jack of all trades stuff here. So whenever I do, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Hyperlink, thank you. So whenever I do an article, I'm hyperlinking, like, let's say there was a document that I referenced. I want to put the web address, like, so you can just click that word and go straight to that document. So that way, like, people can see what that original document actually looked like, right? Because sometimes you just have to take journalists' word for it, that like this document says this thing. I don't like doing that. I like to kind of put a little bit more power in the hands of my readers so that they can actually go like click on and see that original document. So they know I'm not like making it up.
And to piggyback off of that, what documents are being linked to? If it's the original, if it's a primary source, you guys know what primary sources are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Miss Allen won't have to put anybody's head on a pike. But yeah, if it's a primary source, if it is meeting minutes or an agenda or a court ruling versus just, you know, some paraphrase. Thanks, Teddy. You know, versus somebody just, you know, versus a paraphrased version of it. If they're giving you the actual legit documents, they're showing, okay, these are my receipts. That's the source you're more likely to be able to trust. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we ought to throw out there as far as.
I mean the place it's coming from.
Yeah, that's
definitely,
true. Oh yeah, like
definitely.
if you're clicking on biggestwideworldnews.net.
Not a good source.
Not a good source. If the story is littered with spelling errors, typos, punctuation that would make a 6-year-old blush.
If it's clickbait, if it's from like boardpanda.com.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You guys know what clickbait is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said no. No, okay. I didn't know if you were being legit or
No, he's just,
He's
contrarian.
contrarian.
There's always one.
I have one final thing. Where can we, if we have more questions, where could we maybe reach you or find a way to reach out to what you're doing if we would like to know more or contact, because maybe we've got some aspiring journalists in our.
Well, I'm gonna say, yeah, one, that you can go to Addie, although she'll probably kill you after the second or third person. And you know,
Okay, that was not very nice.
Sorry, I'm sorry. TulsaWorld.com. If you can spell my name, you can find me. So,
I don't think I have enough business cards.
I didn't bring my business cards.
But,
I didn't bring them.
I can put my, if it's alright, I can put my email on the board.
Yeah,
and
was that, we
they
can
can
both
write
put
it
ours up
down.
there, and you got, yeah.
Yeah.
Have a, while Beth's doing that, I do want to put in a shameless plug. Circle Cinema is showing a movie called Bad Press. Actually the screening run starts tomorrow, runs through October 12th. It is about the free press fight at the Skokie Nation. Several of my colleagues are interviewed or show up in it. This movie won awards at Sundance this year. It's talking about what happens when you take away press freedoms. What happens when reporters have to deal with government censorship. And this happened here in Oklahoma within the last couple of years. So if, CircleCinema.com has the show times. If you are interested, bug your parents. Full disclosure though, it is a documentary, so it's not bleeped. So,
Curse words exist.
curse
How
words
do
do
you-
exist.
Wait.
In spades in newsrooms. Just saying.
Alright, let's give him a round of applause